Time now 6:34. First Alert, how internet addiction may affect your teen's brain. At the First Alert Safety Desk with Aisha this morning, and a lot of parents, they're going to want to hear about this new research.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just hearing about this morning, and we know how often kids and teens are online, especially social media. And this is looking into how much time they're spending online and on social media, and then eventually complaining about how they're not able to focus on things like homework or spending time with friends and family. So it's pretty interesting research, and that experience we're talking about this morning, that's reflected in the new findings of this study. It was actually just published in the journal PLOS Mental Health. It found in teens with internet addiction, the signals in their brain that are important for things like controlling attention or memory, those areas in their brain were disrupted from what these researchers saw. And the study was a review of 12 neuroimaging studies of a few hundred kids and teens ages 10 to 19 between 2013 and 2022. Researchers this morning say their findings are comparable to looking at people who deal with substance addictions. In the U.S., internet addiction is not listed as a mental disorder, but internet gaming disorder is. If this sounds relatable at all, or if you have a teenager who's always on their phone at home or a tablet, experts say the best way to mitigate your child's internet addiction, if that's the case, it's by teaching them some balance. Find ways to keep them offline, and if you find something that keeps them offline, encourage them to do more of that. There's also family screen time goals we've talked about, goals that you can set as a family so everyone at home is involved in healthier internet habits. Emerson.